In the summer of 1324, the people of Cairo looked out toward the desert and saw a column of travelers coming over the horizon that seemed to have no end. 60,000 people, 100 camels, and by some accounts, each one was bent under nearly 300 pounds of pure gold. And at the center of it, riding toward the greatest city in the medieval world, was a man that most of that world had never even heard of. Within weeks, his generosity would break the economy of Cairo so badly that people were still feeling it 12 years later. 700 years after that, he is still right now, in the age of billionaires and space rockets, routinely called the richest human being who has ever lived. There's just one problem with that title. The number everyone repeats about him isn't real, and the truth is stranger and honestly better than the myth. So let me tell you who was actually riding at the front of that caravan. His name was Musa, and he was the ruler, the Mansa of the Mali Empire in West Africa. And to understand him, you have to throw away the picture that word empire probably just put in your head. Because in the 1300s, while Europe was starving through plague and superstition, Mali was flourishing. It stretched some 2,000 miles from the Atlantic coast deep into the interior of the continent. And underneath that land sat the thing the entire known world wanted: gold. Mali was the single largest producer of gold on earth. And Musa didn't just own the mines. He sat on top of the trade routes that carried that gold north across the Sahara, along with the other precious commodity of the age, salt. Every caravan, every trade, every ounce that crossed his territory answered to him. We think of resources as something a country has. Musa understood them as something a person could control, and he controlled the flow of the most valuable substance in the world. And yet, here's the strange part. Beyond his own corner of Africa, almost nobody knew. His wealth was a quiet local fact, a rumor at the edge of the map, that was about to change forever. Because Musa was a devout Muslim, and he decided to do what his faith called him to do. He would make the pilgrimage to Mecca. But a king does not travel like an ordinary pilgrim. Picture the preparation, the assembling of a small city that could walk. Chroniclers of the time described a caravan of around 60,000 people soldiers, officials, his entire royal court, singers, and some 12,000 enslaved people, many of them, we're told, dressed in fine Persian silk. And the gold, load after load of it, strapped to 100 camels glinting in the desert sun. This wasn't a man carrying spending money. This was a man carrying a treasury across a continent. Now imagine watching that appear on your horizon. You live in a dusty trading town on the edge of the Sahara, and one afternoon, an ocean of silk and gold and human beings comes flowing past your walls, stretching further than you can see. That is the sight that began to move across Africa and the Middle East in 1324. And every single place it touched, it left people stunned, telling stories that would grow with every retelling for centuries. But the moment that turned Musa from a king into a legend happened when that ocean of gold reached Cairo. He arrived in one of the richest, most sophisticated cities on the planet, and he proceeded to do something no economy on earth was built to survive. He gave it away, not carefully, not strategically. He handed out gold to officials, to scholars, to the poor, to merchants, to anyone he met. He paid wildly generous prices. He gave gifts that made grown men weep. For 3 months, the emperor from the west poured his fortune into the streets of Cairo like water. And to the people receiving it, this must have felt like heaven had opened. Except that's not how money works. And this is where the story turns. because gold is only valuable when it's rare, and Musa had just made it common. He flooded so much gold into Cairo that the metal itself began to lose its worth. The price of gold in the city reportedly collapsed by some estimates as much as a 10 to 25%. Merchants, prices, savings, the value of every gold coin already sitting in every purse in the city, all of it distorted, almost overnight, by one man's generosity, and it didn't snap back in a week. The disruption was so deep that when a historian visited Cairo more than a decade later, people were still talking about it. Britannica puts it plainly. His spending affected Cairo's economy for at least 12 years. Think about the scale of that. Not a bad quarter, not a rough year. More than a decade of economic aftershock, caused not by a war or a disaster, but by a single traveler being too kind with too much money. And here's the detail that turns the whole thing almost into a parable. By the time Musa was ready to journey home, he had a problem the richest man alive was never supposed to have. He had run out. He had given away so much gold that he had to borrow it, reportedly at steep rates from Cairo's own merchants, just to fund his trip back. The man who broke the value of gold by having too much of it left the city needing a loan. Now, this is the part of the story where I have to stop being a storyteller for a moment and be honest with you, because that's what we do here. You have almost certainly seen the headline. Mansa Musa, net worth $400 billion. The richest person in all of human history, richer than any modern billionaire, case closed. That number is essentially made up. Not maliciously, but it comes from a celebrity net worth website, not from serious historians. And the historians will tell you something far more humbling. It is basically impossible to translate Musa's wealth into a modern dollar figure. How do you price a man who didn't have money so much as he controlled the world's supply of it? How do you convert the value of gold in the 1300s, in an economy with no stock market and no banks as we know them, into $2,024? You can't. Not honestly. And the rest of the legend? The 60,000 people. The exact weight of the gold, those numbers come from chroniclers, writing after the fact, in an age with no census, and every reason to let an amazing story grow. Some of it is surely true. Some of it is surely exaggerated, and we will never fully know where the line sits. So no, we cannot actually crown him the richest man who ever lived, because we cannot measure it. The precise number is a myth. But once you let go of that number, something more interesting comes into view. Because the myth was never the point. Here is what we know is real. And here is why he's remembered while thousands of other kings are forgotten. That pilgrimage put Mali on the map literally. 50 years after Musa passed through, a European mapmaker drew him into the famous Catalan Atlas, seated on a throne, holding a nugget of gold for all of Europe to see. A kingdom that had been a rumor became, overnight, the most famous source of wealth in the world. And Musa did something with his fortune that the gold in Cairo could never do. He built. He came home and poured his wealth into mosques and libraries and schools. He turned the city of Timbuktu into one of the great centers of learning on earth, a place scholars traveled across deserts to reach, that drew knowledge and books and teachers from across the Islamic world. The gold he threw into the streets of Cairo lost its value the moment there was too much of it. But the universities he built kept producing something that never floods and never devalues: knowledge. And that is the quiet lesson hiding inside history's loudest fortune. Musa is proof of something we forget in an age obsessed with billionaire rankings. Money, even in truly unimaginable amounts, is only worth what it's scarce enough to buy. He owned so much gold that he made gold worth less wherever he carried it. At the very top, the number almost stops meaning anything at all. What survived him wasn't the treasure. It was what he turned the treasure into. The caravan is gone. The gold scattered and lost centuries ago. The $400 billion figure is a fantasy we invented to make sense of him. But the mosque he built in Timbuktu is still standing today, 700 years later. That's the difference between a fortune and a legacy. A fortune is a number, and numbers can be devalued, borrowed against, given away, and forgotten. A legacy is what you build with the fortune before it slips through your fingers, and it's the only part that lasts. The richest man who ever lived couldn't hold on to his gold for a single journey home, but he could build something with it that outlived his empire, his name, and 7 centuries of history. And maybe that, not the gold and not the number, is what actually made him rich. Next time, we're staying with that idea, the difference between the wealth that vanishes and the wealth that lasts, and the quiet truth that decides which one you end up with.